I wonder what it is that you love doing that makes you really happy. One of the things that I love doing is walking. And if I could make all my journeys by foot, I'd be really happy. Sadly, I can't because some of them are just too long. But when I'm walking, I often think about Jesus and the walking that he did. And in the Gospel reading for Environment Sunday, we hear about Jesus walking in the fields with his disciples, and it's harvest time, and his disciples are picking and eating some of the corn around the edge of the fields. There's nothing unusual about this. It was customary at the time to leave crops round the edges of fields so that the poor and the stranger could pick and eat. But on this particular occasion, the Pharisees are annoyed. They're annoyed because they see picking and eating corn as work, and it's the Sabbath, and you shouldn't work on the Sabbath. So, as usual, they collar Jesus and they say, look, we're not happy about what your disciples are doing. And Jesus reminds them that this isn't the first time that somebody has broken the law because they were hungry. King David did it when he ate the consecrated bread in the temple as well. What Jesus is saying is that sometimes pressing human need, sometimes the welfare of human beings is more important than law. They need to get their priorities right. And he says a similar thing in the second incident in our reading today about the man who was sick, who he healed in the temple. So what is he saying here? Is he saying that the Sabbath is not important? Well, I don't think so, because he also says in the passage that the Sabbath was made for humanity and that he is Lord of the Sabbath. My husband and I recently did a pilgrimage in the Balkan states. We'd never been there before, we didn't know anybody there, we didn't speak very much of the language, and so we relied a lot on the kindness and generosity of strangers, and people were very kind and generous. On one occasion when we walked all day with our packs on and we were sitting down for a cup of tea at the end of the day, tired and hungry, our host came with a little plate of cake and she put it in front of us and she said, I made this for you. It's exactly the same words that Jesus uses in the Gospel reading. The Sabbath was made for us. God's welcome, restorative gift. But we live in a society which doesn't put a high value on rest or Sabbath. However, most of us know deep down that Sabbath and rest is good for us. But this isn't the only Sabbath that's talked about in the Bible. In Leviticus, it talks about a Sabbath for the land. Every 7 years, the land being allowed to stay fallow, to rest and recover. If the earth is overused, it becomes exhausted, just like we become exhausted. And over the past couple of centuries, this has happened to a massive extent. It's now estimated that about 40% of the land in the world is degraded, affecting over 50% of the world's population. And we know the physical causes of this degradation: fires, floods, soil erosion, deforestation. Much of it caused by a changing climate. But what is at the root of what's going on? And for me, one of the most memorable and best explanations of this comes from Rowan Williams, who talks about the fact that in industrialised societies, we have thought of the earth as a large warehouse of stuff for our convenience, rather than existing in relation to the mysteries of God. It's our thinking that's been wrong. People who live close to the earth and indigenous communities around the world often understand much better than those in industrialised societies that the earth is a living entity and needs caring for and looking after. We've largely lost that in our society, but maybe now it's beginning to be recovered. So what can we do about this degradation? Well, one of the things is to think about restoring some of the ecosystems, some of the land that we have lost and has become degraded. And the UN has designated 2021 to 2030 as the year of ecosystem restoration. If you go on your website, you can see plenty of examples of what's going on around the world, projects that the UN has put at the forefront of what they're doing. And Environment Sunday this year has the same theme of restoring land and preventing desertification and deforestation. And if we want to do this on a more local scale, organisations such as local wildlife trusts and Caring for God's Acre that focuses on churchyards have a huge range of resources that we can tap into. But this isn't all that we can do. If we want really to restore the earth, we have to prevent future degradation as well as do the work of restoration. Dr. Katie Collins is a curator at the Natural History Museum, and she talks about the possibility of a sixth mass extinction, saying that this is possible but not inevitable. She talks about the fact that we have to change the way we manage and use land. But she also says, because a lot of the degradation is to do with our changing climate, she says this: most of the climate-altering pollution and fossil fuel burning is the responsibility of a small number of parties. It would be much more effective for individuals to put pressure on policymakers and major emitters to reduce emissions. The changes we need to see now can be achieved fastest by prioritising the protection and preservation of nature over the interests of financial systems. What she's saying is that we need to put pressure on those in power to get their priorities right. It's a very similar message to the message that Jesus was giving the Pharisees. Get your priorities right. It's the welfare of people that's important. And in the 21st century, we would say it's the welfare of those who are already suffering because of climate change, of those who will suffer in the future because of climate change and the degradation of our land, of the earth, its life and its creatures. We need to be more concerned about the welfare of these things than other things that people in power are often concerned about. And as the general election looms, there are a couple of things that I wanted to mention in particular. One is something called Restore Nature Now, which is a mass demonstration on June the 22nd in London. It will be peaceful, it will be family friendly. There's a group of Christians going from East London. If you want to join us, let me know. There's also a campaign 0 Hour to try and get the Climate and Nature Bill, which is addressing both the climate crisis and the nature crisis together onto the statute books of Parliament. You can have a look out for that. However, as we reflect on the passage for Environment Sunday, on Sabbath, on welfare, on the wider biblical narrative, on the situation that we as humanity find ourselves in, there may be a deeper message, particularly for us as people of faith. A message about just how much God cares for our welfare and how that welfare depends deeply on the welfare of all people on earth, of all creatures on earth, and of the earth itself.